Shalom, my name is Joseph Shulam, and together with BRADTV, we are recording the weekly portion from the Torah, from the 5 books of Moses that is read in all the synagogues around the world. And the last portion that we talked about together is when Joseph is sold as a slave to the house of Potiphar, one of the Pharaoh's servants. And he does a great job in the house of Potiphar. He is the economist. In other words, he is the manager of all of Potiphar's household. Potiphar's wife tries to seduce Joseph. Joseph is not seductible. He runs away from her. She catches his coat and she accuses him of the opposite. She accuses him of trying to seduce her. And he ends up in jail. I'm going to stop here for a minute and do something general that is very important for our understanding of all the biblical stories, but especially the stories of Joseph. One of the great motifs for novels, for movies, for theater, for opera, for all of human endeavors, is the motif was from rags to riches, and the opposite, from riches to rags. The story of Joseph is full of these two motifs. It starts from riches to rags. Joseph, whose father loves him and he gives him the coat of many colors, above his brothers, especially loves him. He goes from being loved to being hated by his brothers. Being sold as a slave. And now he is in the house of Potiphar. He is accused by the wife of Potiphar of trying to seduce her, and he ends up in an Egyptian jail. And here we arrive to the portion that is called Miketz. It's translated, and it came to pass by the New King James Version. And we're talking about Genesis 41 from verse 1 to 44 verse 17. That's the Torah portion. The parallel portion that is read in the synagogues from the prophets is 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 15 to chapter 4 verse 1. And we read also from the New Testament from 1 Corinthians chapter 2 verse 1 through 5. But let's go back to the beginning of our Torah portion. Genesis 41 verse 1. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. 2 full years from what? 2 full years from the time that Joseph was sent to jail. And he's in jail. 2 years later, Pharaoh has a dream. And he stands by the Nile. The King James Version says the river. The river, when you're talking about Egypt, is always one river. Because Egypt essentially has one great river, one of the greatest rivers in the world, the Nile. And Pharaoh stands by the Nile. The Nile is also one of Egypt's gods. It's not only a river. It's one of Egypt's gods that provides life, sustenance, fertility to all of Egypt. Goes from the south of Egypt all the way to the north of Egypt to the Mediterranean. It's the lifeline of Egypt. And Pharaoh stands by the river, and suddenly there come out of the river 7 cows. Fine looking and fat cows. They were fed well in the meadows around the Nile River. Then behold, 7 other cows come out of the river. Ugly, skinny, mal-fed. And they stood by the other cows, by the fat and fertile and well-fed cows on the bank of the river. The ugly and skinny cows ate up the 7 fine-looking cows, the fat cows, and then Pharaoh awakes. Verse 5 of chapter 41. He slept and dreamed a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain, sheaves, come up in one stalk, plump and good grain on those sheaves. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted, skinny, weak, dried up by the east wind, sprung up out of the ground. And the 7 thin heads, skinny heads, devoured the 7 plump and fertile and full heads. So Pharaoh wakes up, tries to understand the dream, is not able to understand the dream, and in the morning, Pharaoh was disturbed. His spirit was troubled. And he sent to call all the magicians and the wise men of Egypt to come and help him understand the dreams. But there was no one among Pharaoh's wise men to help him understand the dreams and interpret the dreams for him. Then the chief butler of Pharaoh comes with an advice. He says, I remember my sins of the past. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in jail in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker, and each of us had a dream one night, he, the chief baker, and I, according to the interpretation of his own dream. In other words, we couldn't understand our own dream. We had our own interpretation, but it wasn't authoritative interpretation. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us in jail. And that Hebrew man became a servant of the captain of the jail. In other words, he was not only in prison, but he got somehow in charge of certain aspects of the prison and the prisoners. And we told him our dreams, and he interpreted our dreams. Each man, he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass, just as he interpreted to us our dreams, whatever he said would happen, happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged my fellow prisoner, the other guy that had the dreams. Both of them were Pharaoh's servants. Well, Pharaoh heard the recommendation of one of his servants about this prisoner called Joseph, a Hebrew prisoner called Joseph. What would he do? Immediately he sent to get Joseph out of jail, out of the dungeon. King James calls it the dungeon. And of course, before the prisoner that was not shaved, not clean, not dressed right, would be taken before Pharaoh, they had to wash him and shave him and bring nice clothes to him and change him to be a much more honorable person that will go in front of Pharaoh to interpret Pharaoh's dream. He's brought before Pharaoh and he interprets Pharaoh's dreams. To make the long story short, so Joseph interprets, first, both dreams are the same. I want to tell you that this is a well-known fact in modern psychology of dreams, and it's also a biblical dream. People who have dreams in the Bible usually have the same dream in 2 variants that have the same meaning in the end. So Joseph interprets the dream for Pharaoh and says, 7 fat cows are years of plenty, fertility. The land will produce richly. And then after that, there will come 7 lean years, drought, the land will not produce. Both dreams have the same meaning. The dreams of the cows and the dreams of the wheat sheaves have the same meaning. The lean years, the lean cows devour the well-fed fat cows and the fat grain. Again, the same motif that I started this teaching with, which is from rags to riches, and then from riches to rags. That's true with Joseph, but it's also true with Pharaoh and his dreams, and it will be true for all of Egypt. So Pharaoh asks his wise men and his magicians what to do, and it ends up with Joseph. Joseph comes and says what should be done, and Pharaoh on the spot nominates him, if I use modern political terminology, to be the prime minister of Egypt, to handle all the preparation during the 7 fat years in order to survive the 7 lean years. My mother used to not spend money very easily. She worked as a foreman in a factory, and she always would say, we have to save white money for black days. And that's Joseph's way of thinking. During the fat years, save, prepare for the lean years. I know that in modern world, the young generation don't think that way. They think that whatever I have, I'm going to enjoy it now. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? But that's not a wise way to live. Not according to the Torah. And I don't think that it's also according to the prophets, and not according to the teaching of the Yeshua. Yeah, we have to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. The teaching of Yeshua, the parable of Yeshua, of the wise men and the stupid men, that the wise men built on the rock, on the mountain, up the hill, where it's hard to build, and the foolish men built on the sand, on the seashore. When the water came and the floods came, the house that was built on the sand, on a weak foundation, collapsed, but the house that was built with hard labor, more expensive work, up on the mountain, survived. And so you have the same paradigm here in this portion of Miketz. Joseph is appointed as prime minister of Egypt to prepare for the 7 lean years. And remember, Joseph didn't study engineering or economy. He had natural wisdom and divine guidance. I would say divine Holy Spirit guidance to become such a powerful man in Egypt. And everybody knew that Joseph was a Hebrew. Yes, he worked at the service of Pharaoh and he dressed like Egyptian, and his children looked like Egyptian. We'll see it further down in the book of Genesis, that Jacob doesn't recognize Joseph's children because they're dressed and have haircuts, and they have the manners and the language of Egyptians. He married Osnat. In Israel, there are still some Yemenites and Iraqi Jews, maybe Kurdi Jews, that they named their daughters Osnat because it was the wife of Joseph. So the 7 fat years passed, and all of Egypt was networked with Joseph's plan, with storehouses for grain that will provide grain for the 7 years that there is drought in the land. Some archaeologists think that they found such storehouses. As somebody who studied archaeology, I've seen pictures. I don't know if it's real or not. Whatever it is, however, is very interesting that biblical narrative is that Pharaoh was so enamored with Joseph's wisdom and with his plan for the survival of Egypt that he allows Joseph in the end to bring his family to Egypt. But that's going to be in the next Torah portion. In this Torah portion, what happens is that when there is drought in Egypt, that means that the whole Middle East has drought. Especially in the land of Israel, the land of Canaan. And Jacob, like his forefathers, like Abraham, and in time of drought, where do you go to get food? In Egypt. Why is Egypt fertile in the time of drought? Because Egypt doesn't depend on rain, it depends on the Nile. And the Nile is a very special river. It starts in the southern hemisphere and it ends in the northern hemisphere, in the Mediterranean. What happens when we have summer here? What do they have in Ethiopia, in Tanzania, in Rwanda, in Uganda, in Zimbabwe? What do they have? They have their winter. The rain falls in Africa when we are in summer here. We don't have any rain in the land of Israel for months out of the year. But they have in the southern hemisphere, winter time, rain. And the Nile River is one of the only huge, big rivers, major rivers in the face of this earth that flows from south to the north, almost straight line from the south to the north. So when it gets to Egypt, which is in the northern, most of it is in the northern hemisphere, when you get to Egypt, that means that it's the flood time in the summertime, because the water comes from the winter of the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere. So when there is drought in the land of Canaan, people go down to Egypt to get their food from Egypt. So Jacob sends his sons to Egypt to get food. And Joseph, who is now next to Pharaoh in his status in Egypt, finds out, recognizes his brothers, and a very interesting saga starts over here. Joseph doesn't tell them that he's Joseph. They think that Joseph died. They reported to Jacob, their father, that Joseph was devoured by a wild animal, and they dipped his coat of many colors in blood of one of the sheep and presented it to Jacob, and Jacob thinks that Joseph is dead. And they don't know that Joseph is alive. And they couldn't even imagine that God would take Joseph out of the pit of the dungeons of the Egyptian prison and put him in this high position next to Pharaoh. Nobody was higher than Joseph next to Pharaoh. The story of Joseph is a parallel story to the Messiah, to Yeshua. And we're going to talk about this in the next lessons, because Joseph, whom God blessed with dreams and with visions, prophetic dreams of what's going to happen, becomes hated by his own brothers. And even his father and his mother criticized him for these dreams, and they said, what do you think, we're going to bow down to you? You're going to be the sun, or we're going to be the stars, or we're going to be dancing around you and bowing unto you? Not going to happen. But it's going to happen. And Joseph, recognizing his brothers, interrogates them. Here in our portion of the week, questions them, asks about the father and his family, and they try to tell him the truth. father is old and he's grieving for a son that he had but he lost. We are going to return to this story in the next week, in the next portion, which becomes a very, very big drama where Joseph finally breaks down in front of the brothers. And in a very dramatic and emotional scene, reveals to them, no, I am Joseph, your brother. That drama is one of the most dramatic moments in the whole Bible. Beside the cross of Yeshua being crucified in Jerusalem, the story of Joseph revealing himself to his brothers is the most dramatic story in the whole Bible. And we're going to do that in the next week's teaching. May God bless all of you. Read the Bible. Follow our portions by reading them. God bless all of you. Shalom from Jerusalem.